Welcome back to Christian Warrior Training. Today we've got a topic that's as real as it gets, citizen's arrest. Now it's the kind of thing you see in movies, but can happen right before your eyes. And the burning question is, should you leap into action or is that crossing a line? Now from coast to coast, from California to Florida, the rules around citizen's arrest aren't set in stone. Now it's a patchwork of laws, some are clear and some not so much. And it leaves us wondering, if you're witnessing something wrong and there's no officer in sight, what's your next move? Now we're here to sift through the legal jargon, offer some straight talk, and maybe, just maybe, add a dash of good old common sense into the mix. Now, whether you're keeping watch or just going about your day, we're going to serve up some hefty considerations on whether to step in or step aside. So today we're going to lay it all out on today's show, and we're going to hash out everything citizen's arrest. Let's jump right into it. All right, before we get started, here's a quick word to the wise. The content we're diving into today is meant for general information purposes only. It's not legal advice and shouldn't be taken as such. Now, laws vary by location and change over time, and the specifics of your situation can affect the applicability of the concepts that we discuss. If you find yourself in a spot where you need legal help, you got to contact a qualified professional who can give you guidance based on the most current laws and information. So sit back, let's explore it together with an open mind and understanding that this podcast does not substitute for good legal counsel. Now, a little bit about me. I have made citizen's arrests and I have received thousands of citizen's arrests. I was one of the cops that when I was on the road that I would often tell people that they had an option to make a citizen's arrest. Now, all of you know that I was a cop in California, and California actually has really good citizen's arrest laws, probably some of the best I've seen in the States. In that, as long as you see a crime, you can make a citizen's arrest. I would always tell people that they had the option, if they witnessed the crime, to make that citizen's arrest, and I would encourage them to do so. I can't tell them to do it. They have to do it on their own, in which case I would always encourage it because some people just need to go to jail. So let's talk about briefly what a citizen's arrest is. Now, a citizen's arrest is an arrest made by a private citizen, which is in contrast to the typical arrest made by a police officer. Now, citizen's arrests are lawful in certain limited situations, such as when a private citizen personally witnesses a violent crime and then detains the perpetrator. So for example, in tort law, a citizen's arrest is something that any person can do without being held liable for interfering with another person's interests when that interference would otherwise constitute assault, battery, or false imprisonment. This means that any person can physically detain another in order to arrest them, but state statutes define the limited circumstances in which the deprivation of liberty is allowed. Now in Texas, the citizen's arrest statute states that any person may arrest someone that is committing a felony or any offense against the public peace in front of them. In California, the citizen's arrest statute states that any person may arrest another for a public offense committed or attempted in their presence, when the person arrested has committed a felony, although not in their presence, and when a felony has been in fact committed and he possesses reasonable cause for believing the person arrested to have committed it. Now, in general, the ability to perform a citizen's arrest is the same for a regular person as it is for a police officer without a warrant. Now, again, each state is different. I encourage you to look up your state's laws when it comes to citizen's arrest and know it. Let's go over the basics of a citizen's arrest. Now, the definition of it, you're arresting that person for the crime, just like a police officer would. Let me give an example. If I'm driving down the road and I see a guy spray painting graffiti on a wall, as a police officer, I can pull over and arrest that person. And if they resist, I can overcome their resistance. I'll give you an example of California, because remember, each state is different. A majority of our followers are from California, so that works out well for us. If you see somebody spray painting graffiti on your church, you could go arrest them for that crime. And if they overcome your resistance, you can go ahead and use further force to detain them. I can already see what's going to happen in the comments, and everybody's going to say, just call the police. Yes, of course, just call the police. I agree 100%. Let them do it. I am putting out a number of videos and I've been putting out a lot of information about how law enforcement has been significantly degraded since 2014 and even much more so since 2020. A lot of people are leaving law enforcement and not a lot of people are coming back into law enforcement. The people that traditionally become cops are not doing it. And there is a significant deficit of police officers on the street. And if we all wait for a cop to show up, you're going to be waiting a long time. You have to use good judgment. Listening to this podcast is not enough. I'm making you aware of citizen's arrests and the things that you can do. I suggest that you go out and look at your state and see what you can and can't do, and then train and train and train and keep training. Now let's look at the historical concept of what a citizen's arrest is. Now, the concept of a citizen's arrest is deeply rooted in historical legal practices that date back to medieval England. Now, originally, it was an essential part of the community law enforcement where professional police forces didn't exist, and the responsibility for upholding the law often fell to ordinary citizens. The legal framework allowed individuals to detain those committing crimes to be held until proper legal authorities could handle the case. This practice was predicated on the principle of maintaining public order and the collective responsibility of community safety. Now, in modern times, the criteria and circumstances under which a citizen's arrest can be made have been significantly refined, and it varies widely across jurisdictions. Generally, a citizen's arrest is permissible if an individual witnesses a felony being committed or has reasonable cause to believe that a felony has occurred. Now, felonies are serious crimes such as murder, robbery, or burglary. Now, in some instances, misdemeanors involving a breach of peace or immediate threat to the public may also justify a citizen's arrest. Now, the primary aim is to prevent the escalation of a situation, protect oneself or others from immediate harm, or detain a suspect in a scenario where police cannot promptly respond. It's important for individuals considering a citizen's arrest to be aware of the legal boundaries and potential risks. Making an arrest without proper legal basis can lead to criminal charges or civil lawsuits against the arresting citizen. So while the right to perform a citizen's arrest still exists, it carries substantial legal and personal risks, making it crucial that such actions are performed with caution and deep understanding of the relevant laws. Now let's talk about some general circumstances where a citizen's arrest might be applicable. As an example, you see somebody breaking into a car in the church parking lot. Now look, you can wait for the police to show up. I get that. But they also might get away beforehand. Now, there was an incident that I put out a couple months ago about a Pastor Clemmy in West Memphis. Somebody was stealing the Sunday school teacher's car in the parking lot. So Pastor Clemmy went out to confront that person to stop them. Unfortunately, Pastor Clemmy was shot and the suspects escaped. A number of the comments in my YouTube video said that he should have let them go. Insurance was going to cover whatever was stolen and it wasn't worth it. We have to remember where Pastor Clemmy ministers to people in that area, they don't have a lot of money. And the Sunday school teacher getting her car stolen, she's probably not going to be able to replace it because she doesn't have insurance that's going to replace a stolen car. And so Pastor Clemmy going out there and confronting them, I have no problem with that. I wish more people would do that. And he went out to confront them. Now, technically, Pastor Clemmy can go out and make the arrest, physically stop them, hold them, and if they resist, hold them down until the police showed up. Is that the wisest thing to do? It depends. It depends. How long is it going to take for law enforcement to get there? Do you have the people and the equipment to keep that person in place until the police get there? Do you have, most importantly, the training to do that? Do you have the defensive tactics training? Do you have the common sense training? Do you know when to stop because the person might die from asphyxiation or something like that? There's a lot that goes into it. I'm just giving you some ideas so you can look into it and further research this, and then you and your church security team train and work this out. I just want to take a quick moment to let you know about a new class that I've got coming out on June 2nd, Gunshot Wound Response. It is part of our Trauma Tactics Series 1. It is being taught by a Special Operations Pararescueman. These are the guys that jump behind enemy lines to save our pilots. The Special Operations Pararescueman that I have coming in is fresh from a combat zone where he has been treating gunshot wounds for months. He has a lot of experience with field surgery and paramedicine in a combat environment. This guy's awesome. He is going to have a full day of treating gunshot wounds, which I think is super important for you to learn. It is going to be here in Boise, Idaho, at Boise Krav Maga. You have to register ahead of time. There are only a certain number of seats and it is filling up fast. So if you want to go, you better sign up now before we run out of seats. I will put a link in the show notes or in the description below. Again, June 2nd, taught by a Special Operations Pararescueman over at Boise Krav Maga in Boise, Idaho. I hope to see you there. Another good example is domestic violence. If you have a domestic violence that occurs in the church, which has happened a lot, it happens frequently. If you witness a domestic violence, you can detain the aggressor and keep them from leaving and place them under citizen's, then turn them over to the police. You're making the arrest instead of the officer. What if you saw a parent unlawfully taking a child from the Sunday school? That is another example. If you witness somebody assaulting the pastor or any other individual in your church, if you witness somebody stealing, if you have an employee that's embezzling, these are all examples of where in a church that you can make a citizen's arrest. The most important thing to remember is you personally witnessed the crime. Now, California has a caveat where if a felony occurred, but you didn't witness it, but you have enough evidence to show that it did, you could make the arrest. My personal opinion to you and my personal advice to you is to not do it unless you personally witness the crime and you have all the facts. Now, there's some legal boundaries and risks that come with this. Now, each state is completely different. This is a big, ginormous overview for the United States. Most states require that you directly witness the crime. I gave you the example of California where you don't necessarily need to have that. Telling the person that they are under arrest is not necessary, but it helps if they do resist. Now, some states may require you to tell them that they're under arrest. Me personally, when I took a citizen's arrest from somebody, I would always have them come over to the handcuffed individual and tell them, I am placing you under citizen's arrest, just to make it official. So I would detain them in handcuffs so they wouldn't assault the person. And then I would have them come over and then say, I'm placing you under citizen's arrest for whatever. And then the most important thing, contact the police immediately. If you're making that citizen's arrest, I mean, you have to start the legal proceedings. And that part is calling the police and say you've made a citizen's arrest and you have somebody detained. Now, there are potential risks and consequences of an improper arrest, just like a police officer. You have kidnapping. Kidnapping is moving anybody against their will, even if it's only 1 or 2 steps. So if you tell them they can't go anywhere and then you drag them into an office, that would be kidnapping. You have false imprisonment. If you say that they're under arrest, but you had no legal authority to arrest them and then you held on to them, that's false imprisonment. And then of course we have battery. If they resist, because if they know what you did is false and they want to overcome your force and you batter them to overcome their force, you're the one that's going to be wrong. So you have to make sure you know what you're doing is right. Now look, you see a guy breaking into a car, you see him break the window, and the owner is standing next to you and says, they're stealing whatever out of my car, the car stereo. And you go over there, it's burglary. You saw it. Don't freak out too much about this. If you saw a guy walk up to his wife and punch her in the face and make an expletive like you stupid and then like the B word, that would be an example of spousal battery, and you witnessed that. So don't get too into this. Now, it's important to understand the difference between felonies and misdemeanors. Now, we have 3 classifications of crimes. We have an infraction, which some of you may have found out what an infraction is. That's speeding, right? You get a speeding ticket, that's an infraction. Drinking in public, if that's illegal where you're at, muni codes, municipal codes, anything like that. Usually it's an infraction, which means you get just a ticket, no jail time, no nothing else, just pay a fine. Now, misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are jail time with less than a year. It includes battery, assault. Now, battery is punching somebody. Assault would be, I'm saying, I'm going to punch you. You have vandalism under a certain amount of money, and you have theft under a certain amount of money. Those are all misdemeanors, less than a year in jail. Usually you're going to go to the county lockup. Now, felony means prison time over 1 year, means you're going to go to the state prison. That includes usually Part 1 crimes, arson, murder, rape, burglary, aggravated assault, motor vehicle theft. Actually, I think 2 of those might be Part 2 crimes, but you get the idea, right? Now let's talk about state-specific variations. I am going to pick the 3 most represented states at Christian Warrior Training. Texas, you are number 1 for Christian Warrior Training because you are God-fearing state. I love you. In Texas, the right of a citizen to conduct an arrest is enshrined in the Texas Penal Code 14.01. It grants the power to arrest to not only peace officers, but to an individual when they witness a felony or disturbance of the peace. However, misdemeanors are not grounds for a citizen's arrest, which is weird to me. And such an act could be considered unlawful, potentially resulting in legal repercussions for the arresting individual. So when a citizen's arrest is made, the individual must employ only reasonable force to detain the offender and is required to hand the person over to a law enforcement officer. The definition of reasonable force can be complex, and using excessive force could lead to criminal charges against the citizen making the arrest. Let's talk about that real quick. Excessive force. Citizens are held to the same standard as police officers. In fact, in California, officers are held to a way higher standard. It's very difficult for them to use force now, and citizens can actually use a lower means of force. But for the most part, the easiest guide for me to tell you is if you don't think a police officer should be doing it, then you shouldn't be doing it either. Now in California, the laws around citizens' arrests are codified in Penal Code 837. Now, a private individual may conduct a citizen's arrest if they witness a misdemeanor being committed in their presence, know of a felony that has been committed even if they didn't witness it, or have a reasonable cause to believe a person has committed that felony. After performing an arrest, the individual must call the police immediately, inform the arrestee of their intentions and the reason for the arrest, and exercise caution to use only reasonable force if necessary. Now, it's emphasized that citizens' arrests come with significant responsibilities and risks, including the potential for criminal charges or civil lawsuits if that arrest is determined to be wrongful. That is the same risk that a police officer takes. That is, cops have been arrested for kidnapping, false imprisonment, you name it. California, the reason why I made so many citizens' arrests is because citizens can make an arrest if they witness a misdemeanor. I, as a police officer, cannot make an arrest if I did not witness that misdemeanor crime. So they would tell me what misdemeanor they saw, like vandalism or theft. And I would tell them, I can't make the arrest because I didn't witness it. This guy needs to go to jail, however. I'm encouraging you to make a citizen's arrest, but you don't have to. And I would lay out how it works. And then a majority of the time, citizens would make that arrest because they didn't know that they had that authority. And they didn't know I couldn't make an arrest if I didn't witness it. Which is funny, when I first became a cop, I thought that was the weirdest thing because I always thought cops could make an arrest. If there was a crime, I thought, well, they can just arrest them and then take them to jail. And that's not necessarily the case. It's very odd when you are first brought to it. Now in Florida, that's our third state that's highly represented at Christian Warrior Training. The law follows common practice regarding citizen's arrest. Now, this means that a private individual may detain another person if they witness or have a reasonable belief that the person committed a felony. The guidelines for a citizen's arrest are detailed in a case called McCannis versus State, which included requirements such as the intention to arrest, the actual seizure or detention of the person, the communication of the intent to arrest, and the understanding of the person being arrested that the detention is the intention. While arrests can sometimes be made for misdemeanors, such as in the case of shoplifting witnessed by a store employee, they are generally limited to felonies. Additionally, in cases like DUI, which is considered a breach of the peace, a citizen's arrest can also be made. The person making the arrest must call law enforcement immediately after detaining the suspect. Using excessive force or causing harm to the individual could lead to charges like assault or false arrest. Therefore, citizen's arrests are not specifically legislated in Florida statutes, but they are indeed recognized under common law with the stipulation that they should be exercised judiciously and in accordance with legal standards. All right, so let's go back to the reasons that we want you to consider a citizen's arrest. Now, you have a lack of law enforcement in your area, and if you don't act quickly, that person's going to get away and you'll never find them. Or another example is police inaction. I cannot tell you how many times as a supervisor I would go to a call and I would see an officer kissing off a call. And in my mind, I did not think that was right, that we should have been doing something to help that citizen. It happens. It happens a lot, and especially now that law enforcement is treated so harshly by the public. A lot of them have resorted to just being a fireman and responding, taking the call, doing the minimum amount of work and leave. Why? If they do more work, they will have the chance of getting in trouble, having somebody complain, or exposing themselves to liability that they don't need. And so if they do less, you're actually rewarded for doing less work. To be honest, this is what the public has asked for after 2020. And so you have some officers that have a lot of inaction. And so as a supervisor, I would roll up and tell the citizen, hey, you can make a citizen's arrest, and I encourage you to do so. And I was basically forcing the cop to go now do something. So if you see there is inaction, I encourage you to ask the officer, can I make a citizen's arrest? And they're going to have to give you an answer. And if they say, yes, you can, you want to strongly think about that. I think the best way to do a citizen's arrest is to call the police, and when they arrive, if nothing is happening, then ask them, can I make a citizen's arrest? Or the person is going to be let go, ask, I witnessed this, can I make a citizen's arrest? And then you can take it from there. I think that's the best way of handling it versus you rolling up and saying you're under citizen's arrest, right? Another way is like if you see a battery in the church, somebody beats their wife, to go and say, hey, This is God's house. I get so much mileage out of this in de-escalation. Going up to the person, grabbing a hold of them, saying, hey, you're in God's house. This is not right. Let's come on over here. And then they are willingly on their own coming over to a certain place and then waiting for law enforcement to show up. That's the best way to handle it. But if that person says, no, I'm leaving, and they're going to leave. Now, look, if spousal battery, you probably know who it is. Or, then go ahead and let them go and let the police go capture them. But for some reason, if you want to hold on to him, good example is the wife's like, oh, no, it wasn't that bad. But she's sitting there with a bloody nose and a black eye. And she's like, I really don't want to do anything. That would be a good time for a citizen's arrest, right? Even though she doesn't want to do anything. If we're talking about a church environment, we're not talking about the general public. If you're in the general public, don't get involved in their crap. That stuff's been going on for a long time usually. Another reason to do a citizen's arrest is to prevent an escalation or to prevent immediate harm. If you see a guy just pummeling his wife, we're talking about in a church setting, and he's pummeling his wife, and if you don't intercede, she's really going to get hurt. Then pull him off. You're under arrest. You don't have to say under citizen's arrest. Hey, you're under arrest. Stop immediately. The more he resists, the more force you can use to overcome his resistance. You're starting to get into a lot of liability for yourself. But let me give you an example for people in the state of Idaho. You just had, again, we're talking about at the church. They just gave you immunity for using force. So an example like we're talking about here, you don't have gross negligence. A common person would look at that and want to act in the same way you are. You can go ahead and detain them until police show up, and you are given immunity by the state from prosecution and from civil litigation. That's pretty cool. There are some other states that have that as well. You really got to look into what your protections are, what insurance you have, and look at what you can and can't do. There is a lot to this, more than I'm going to address in this podcast. I'm just giving you ideas. Hopefully not bad ones, hopefully good ideas. The other reason why you may want to do a citizen's arrest is community responsibility and protection. We need to take our communities back. We have let them go. We have allowed it to go back because everybody says, don't get involved. Let the police handle it. Well, now you've demasculated the police and you've taken away their authority in a lot of cases. A lot of cops are quitting because you've taken the authority away from them, so they don't want to be cops anymore because they don't have the authority to stop crime like they used to. And so really it's incumbent upon citizens to take their country back. And so there is a little bit of that movement. And I honestly have no problem with doing a citizen's arrest. Since I've moved to Idaho, I've done a citizen's arrest. I saw a guy exposing himself. I can't be too graphic here, but he was exposing himself to a clerk at a counter. He was high on meth. And I was like, no. And he decided to leave. And as he was leaving, a lot of people wanted to jump on him and beat the crap out of him. And he was high. That was not the appropriate thing to do. And I said, everybody let it go. And I told the guy, even though he didn't comprehend what I was saying, was, hey, you're under arrest for indecent exposure. You need to stop. And he continued. And then we called the police. And when the police showed up, the officer doesn't know what's going on. He rolls up, sees the guy fully clothed, high on meth, and says, hey, sir, tell me what's going on. And the guy was going to take off and be resistive. And the cop was trying to catch up with everything. I turned to that officer and I looked at him. I said, hey, I'm a retired police officer. I will do a citizen's arrest for indecent exposure. I saw him expose himself and pleasure himself in front of the clerk back at this store. And the look on his face was like, awesome. I know, like, everything was clear now. He's got a guy that says he witnessed it and he wants to make a citizen's arrest for it. And we all got into a fight and we had to use force to get him under control and everything was fine. So that would be an example of community responsibility and protection. Look, I felt a responsibility. It's my state. I don't want people doing that here. And I want to make it a little bit more comfortable for that police officer. Another reason is just upholding justice. It's just the right thing to do. And so you need to know your rights and exercise your rights. Now let's talk about safety considerations. When you attempt to make that citizen's arrest, some people may resist you and you have to make a decision. Are you going to overcome their resistance? It depends on what it is. You need to figure out the prioritization of your personal safety and that of others versus making that arrest. It's the same thing a police officer does. I've been in instances as a uniformed police officer where I rolled up and I realized I'm going to have a massive fight with this guy that I want to arrest. And I've told them they're under arrest and the fight's going to happen. And they're like, I'm just going to walk away. And I said, okay, but there's going to be problems coming when my friends get here. And I called for emergency cover and everybody rolled up. And when I had enough people, we took them into custody using that force necessary to effect the arrest. You can picture that however you want. So you need to decide what you're going to do, right? I'm sure if Pastor Clemmy knew that he was going to get shot in the face, he might have handled things a little bit differently. And again, I'm not throwing shade on Pastor Clemmy. I think it's wonderful that he went out there and very courageously went out there to try to stop somebody from stealing the Sunday school teacher's car. I'm just trying for everybody to look at these instances and try to figure out how we can do it better. So you see a guy breaking into a car. Do we need to take him into custody for a property crime? We don't need to, we want to. So you call up all your friends that are working church security that have pepper spray, got 3 guys that know Krav Maga, another 2 that knew jiu-jitsu, and you show up with 7 people, and then you basically get into a perfect containment of that guy and say, you're under arrest for stealing from that car. We suggest you don't resist and you sit on the curb right here. And if he decides to run, fight, whatever, then you do what you need to do. But remember, you'll be held accountable if you use excessive force. Sometimes when it might be better to observe and report rather than intervene, we'll go back to that somebody breaking into a car. You can call 911, which I'm sure somebody, like Pastor Clemmy probably knew calling 911 in Memphis, it was going to be a while before somebody gets there. Not throwing shade on Memphis. I've trained those cops before. It's just realistic that it's a high crime area with not enough cops. And it's going to be a while before somebody shows up. But if, like where I live, I know that there's going to be some cops showing up. So here it might be better for us just to call it in, call 911, observe and report, and let the police come in and take them down. Another one might be a shooting. If somebody is shooting at another person, you might want to decide, do I need to get involved in their conflict? As an example, you see 2 gang members shooting it out in the parking lot because we do have gangs coming to church. Example, where I worked, we had Norteño and Sereno gangs and they all went to the same Catholic church. Okay, so if there was a confrontation at the church, do I want to be, and none of my parishioners are being involved. It's just 2 gang members shooting each other and there's no risk of my people. Do I want to get in the middle of their shooting? Maybe not. Maybe I don't want to jump in the middle of that and try to effect an arrest for attempted murder on those guys. Because ultimately, if I get hurt and get killed, it was over 2 dirtbags that nobody cared about and none of my people were at risk. It might be better just to hold the line to make sure none of my people get hurt and to call it in and let the cops roll in and let the cops do their business. All right, now let's talk about alternatives to citizen's arrest. Now, there might be situations where it might be more appropriate to call professional law enforcement. And we just outlined some of those. I think you should always call law enforcement first and let that be your guide as to what you're going to do. Most of the time, you're going to call law enforcement and they're going to tell you, we're not going to be there for another half an hour. And you think, well, I need to take care of this now because he's going to get away and we don't know who it is. Other times, you know they're going to show up and you'll just wait until the cops detain them and then say, do I need to make a citizen's arrest? And they can let you know. Now, let's talk about ethical and practical considerations. Now, I just want you to think about the ethical considerations in depriving somebody of their civil liberties. Is it worth it? Just ask yourself, is it worth it? And if I have to overcome their resistance, is that worth it? And think about using too much force, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and all the other things that you could be accused of. And I just want you to think, is what I'm doing ethical? Is it practical? Is there a better way of doing this? And you should constantly ask yourself that. Now, I invite you to consult with your local law enforcement and legal experts in your area to better understand about the laws in your area. I think your church security team needs a class in effecting and understanding citizens' arrest for your state. How do you do that? Contact your local police department and ask them to present that training for you, and they can tell you. And it's free. They'll probably do it I know they'll do it for free. Now, look, I encourage feedback and questions on what we just talked about because there was a lot to unpack. There was so much there. Leave a note in the comments. I read every comment, or I try to read every comment. I not necessarily can respond to everybody, but I encourage you to leave your comment and I encourage you to leave questions or what have you back over at christianwarriortraining.com. This specific podcast notes, you can go ahead and leave a comment down there. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave it in the YouTube comments and I will get to them the best I can. Stay tuned because we have a lot of more great subjects to talk about over here at Christian Warrior Training. If you have stuff that you want covered, then go ahead and leave a note in the comments or just hit reply to my emails and then leave a comment about what you're hoping to get covered. I'd really appreciate it. That's all I've got for now. Remember your ABCs. Always be caring.